All right, welcome to the Modern Human Podcast with Wendy.
And Brenda. Hello, everyone.
Hi, guys. We're back, and have been kind of approached by many different people about this concept. You know, and some of the questions that these people have had was, how do I protect myself from negative energy, or how do I
navigate being around people that are negative or kind of spreading maybe hatred or judgment or criticism about themselves or each other, and just how do we stay centered? How do we protect ourselves? Which is an interesting conversation, and I feel like the tone and the framework of the question itself kind of answers some of that question for them, in that, you know, even if someone's saying that they have to protect themselves, for example, they're saying, I'm not feeling safe in this environment, or I'm not feeling safe around that energy. And that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, how we show up for this and how we navigate staying centered and feeling at peace and even feeling enlightened, let's say, or what would be some of the better language, Wendy? Like just feeling, you know, kind of a higher frequency or at peace and loved
at peace
and safe.
and free from it, you know, or not reactive or triggered. You know, how do we, especially in these changing times, you know, that experience might be prevalent for a lot of people.
Right. And we spoke prior to starting, and one of the things that came about was you really actually wouldn't want to not be triggered if the trigger is there. That kind of system of the psyche and the human being is actually a gift. So practicing not being triggered by the trigger is actually what creates the new neural pathways in your brain and in your reality and in your life. So you really want that trigger if it's still there, so that you can reprogram, rewire, and shift your energy into a different frequency, like a higher, more abundant, more peaceful, more loving.
Yeah, and I think said in a different way is just, if you are being triggered, or if they're having a situation or that where you feel like your boundaries are being crossed, you don't feel safe, is recognizing and seeing that there's wisdom, or there's something that spirit wants you to become aware of,
or your higher self, however you want to frame that. Yeah.
So like really just being curious, like, why is this coming up?
Exactly.
What's inside of me that is wanting to, or coming to the surface? What part of me is needing my attention or my love?
And you're allowed to not like things, of course, always, and allowing yourself to not judge it as good or bad, right? I feel that's one of the most powerful practices, because it allows us to intimately, powerfully shift out of a system of functioning that's about survival or lack, because we're in charge now, because I'm curious, I'm accepting without any judgment that I may be angry or resentful or feeling unworthy or feeling insecure or sad or guilty or even shame, right? We're just owning that thoroughly. They're not always easy things, and they're pretty simple if you can kind of slow down your practice to allow yourself to be mindful, right? Allow yourself to truly break bread with or unravel all the nuances of how you feel and what you think.
Yeah, or just becoming aware of how you feel and how you think.
Right, exactly. Because the other thing that Wendy and I spoke of is that there is actually no other system to figure out your subconscious or your shadow self than to be triggered, or to be, well, no, I'm going to use that word, triggered. You know, because if we're being triggered, if others are upsetting us, then we're learning maybe where our subconscious thinks that we shouldn't have a boundary, or we are meeting up with a thought system or a pattern that doesn't align with who we really are, and so we're feeling that push-pull or that discomfort or pain. So I'm going to say that again, because I think it's really important. We need to unravel our subconscious and our shadow selves, and one of the ways that we do that is by having these experiences that we almost intellectually think we have to protect ourselves from or make go away. And the thing is that the going away is an internal journey of, can you own whatever part of this is yours inside of you, and then set boundaries accordingly? Can you use your words in loving, positive, healthy ways? And all of this does take practice, and there are tools to then say, I'm not really liking this, and I need to not be around it, or I'm not liking this and I need to say some version of that to this person because I'm just going along with it, which is truly violating for ourselves. It's not respecting our own self if we're not liking how something's being said, and we don't have to judge that person or criticize them. We can say, well, it doesn't really work for me to like be negative about everything all the time. I know things can get really hard, and yet for me it's really important that I own whatever part of it is mine, and I try to be as positive or loving or healthy or peaceful as I possibly can. Making sense with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you just explained it all very thoroughly. I feel like in some ways what they're asking, in like you said, and we kind of talked about it beforehand, is like these. It was just a consistent theme that people kept coming in and asking us, and I feel like in it is just people needing permission to not like it, or like admittance that they didn't like something, whether it's at work or with family members or whatever, right? So they're needing approval or allowing themselves to feel the way that they do first, which is that you're saying. So allowing them to feel the way that they feel, and then in not liking it, and what do they do about that, So what can people do about that in regards to create? Really, it comes down to just creating boundaries. If you're feeling negatively attacked or even spiritually attacked by somebody else, or if you're not wanting to be around or it's draining you to be around certain people, it's boundaries.
Right.
And how do we, for a lot of people, am I allowed to even want the boundary?
Right.
Am I allowed to even create a boundary? And a lot of people that come from trauma, we're taught that we're not allowed to create boundaries.
Right.
So.
And they'll have to break bread with that. They'll have to show up for those thoughts or beliefs that say they're not supposed to, right? So like really unraveling, diving deep requires spending time with yourself, and really separating yourself from the other person for a minute to figure out where your boundaries are. Because then you're reminding me of something else really important, Wendy, and it is that we sometimes have to set boundaries in our own self, within our own thinking. Because of our trauma, because of our subconscious or our shadow, we can have ways of being that are inauthentic or harmful to our own selves. And we don't really know that until we know it, right? So really showing up for, one of the things I know you and I have been talking about, Wendy, is like having a problem. Having a problem is really addictive. I mean, it's so prevalent everywhere. Well, when I drove to work, I had a problem with the windshield wiper. It's silly, but
somebody didn't use their blinker.
Right.
And we hold on to
we
it.
really do kind of cultivate this culture that has problems. Whether it's I don't really like how I look, or I want to criticize my house isn't something enough, or I'm not really sure. I just know that this is a habit that we have within our psyches and our humanness. And so setting those boundaries within myself whenever those types of languages arise within me where I want to criticize or judge something. And for me too, I have to set boundaries a lot with where my thinking self is willing to go, right? I find myself sometimes worrying and practicing that of saying, no, there's nothing to worry about. Right? That's part of having a problem, is that what if, there's World War III? What if the economy falls? These are really big global things that I don't have control over minutely, and yet I have an input in the energy that I hold within my own self of like, what am I doing within my own being? Where are my boundaries in that? And that's tough because we do have things happening externally to us. So owning that and interacting with it in a healthy, more abundant, maybe more aware, conscious, spiritually aware, a way of doing that just works for our authentic self.
So what I hear you say is that an issue of being in a situation for themselves, though they may have to create physical boundaries externally, is to look at their internal boundaries of like what they're allowing, or habits or things that are reoccurring within them.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really important thing that, I know that we're kind of basing this off of the emails and the questions that we've been asked from people, and that makes sense. it's this awareness that a lot of that can be the internal thought systems or patterns within our own system of functioning. Like, how do we show up and interact with life? Are we allowing life to love us and support us? Because that does require a feeling space and a thinking space, and it does require an ownership of how we're treating our physical vessel, how we're feeding it, what foods. And then, the creative space of using the imagination where everything is possible. And I know we don't really talk about that creative space that you clearly have a mastery of. It's just, it is an important tool of like, where are the boundaries of that? So much of where we are now is like, we don't even have a voice. We don't even have an expression for these certain parts. And when we do, we're separating them so severely that, we have those that are in shape and they focus in on being healthy. And then we have those that are emotionally aware but maybe don't have a voice in these other areas. And it's like, it's this conversation that I know we've been talking about for years now, Wendy, of like, we have to bring all of this together. So these boundaries need to exist in all of the nuances of our being, and what does that look like and feel like is unique and special for each and every one of us. So there's not really one shoe fits all. Am I making it more complicated?
I feel like you're really describing the bigger picture, but how would we break that down to these individuals of like that are having these situations that maybe don't know how to?
Well, first step would always be we're going to show up and we're going to notice. We're going to notice minutely, profoundly how it makes you feel, what you think about it, what are your thoughts around it, right? And then I would argue that the next step I would love to see, and I don't know that we're doing this enough yet, is kind of going into what part of this am I accountable for? What part of this am I responsible for with my belief systems and my thoughts? Meaning, what is my subconscious programmed to believe about the world around me or about these external things coming at me?
Right, and so I feel like in a few of the situations, it was just like, how do I energetically protect myself from somebody that feels like an energy vampire or just really negative? And in fact, it's like there must be a belief system within these individuals that doesn't allow them to actually create physical boundaries, like meaning limiting your time with them or not saying no to them. So there must be a belief within them where they feel like they can't.
Right, especially if that's a close family member,
or if it's a coworker or something, but you can.
Right.
I mean, the truth is that you can actually create a boundary. It's just your limited belief system that you can't.
Right. And I know, like, one of the mental health tools that we use, it's called gray rocking. And gray rocking will help you just not engage with any intimate topics. So you'll talk about the weather. When they say something really like harsh or insensitive, you're like, oh, okay. And you just leave it at that. But you practice that, and you kind of like know your one-liners going into the conversations with people like that. So you go in knowing you're just going to say, oh, okay, all right, yeah. Or some of the ways I interact with people like that is I'll say things like, that actually doesn't work for me right now. And I just leave it at that. I'm not saying no, I don't want a conflict, I don't want to feel their rage, and yet I'll just kind of give this just kind of gray kind of, it doesn't work for me right now, I'm good. And more that kind of taker will realize that they're not going to get anything from you because you're not going to explain yourself. You're not going to feel bad because they feel bad. And you are going to not people please them, right? And that does take practice. That's not necessarily a switch. It's a slowly and surely, way of showing up.
Yeah, because I do feel like, you're talking about when you're talking about the whole system of like, becoming aware of all of your parts and, like the self-mastery of that. Like, how do you feel? What do you think about all of these things? And because I feel like energetically when people are in those situations, where they're with somebody who's just, maybe a very squeaky wheel, very negative, maybe a doomsdayer, or, somebody that
maybe it's criticizing a bunch of people,
criticizing, or maybe you just don't like how you feel around them. Sometimes it's just simply that.
Sure.
It is. I feel like what I would say to that would be, practicing, breath work, becoming aware of your own physical body, in maintaining an energy field where you can fill it with love and light using your imaginative space or within your being to create a protective barrier, just so my own mind or my own psyche feels safe enough to kind of expand out.
Right. Keeping your nervous system calm and balanced.
So, right, I can become aware of thoughts or belief systems or whatever, because if I'm in flight or freeze because somebody's triggering me and I don't even know why, but if I can create, calming my nervous system down in the moment, it'll help me to recognize some of those. Oh, that's because that person reminded me of my father, or that person reminded me of one of my exes or whatever.
Sure.
Because in the moment you won't even have that awareness. You just know you want to either kill them or run or whatever.
Well, and that's almost like a moment of like crisis. Like if you notice yourself kind of being dysregulated so much, that's really important. So like whatever you need to feel safe. I know for me, one of the ways that I manage that is I'll definitely breathe, of course. I'll try to slow it down, but sometimes that doesn't work for me. So I'll start saying within myself over and over, even if they're still talking and you can just kind of feel their maybe aggression or frustration, is I'll just start saying, Brenda, I love you. Brenda, I love you so much. Brenda, I love you. I love you. I love you. And I'll say it over and over. I'm not even hearing the words that are coming out of their mouth because their vibe is so overt and obvious, that was the same word, but by saying that, I'm creating this kind of internal safety that I begin to notice that I slow myself down. My nervous system goes, oh, okay, we're okay, and no matter what that person's bringing me, I'm still okay, right? And just honoring kind of what we've been talking about, I do notice after the fact, when I am calm, when I am safe, when I'm not around that person, I do notice that experience was an opportunity for me to recognize more of the belief systems within me or the traumas within me that I didn't realize were still there, where I did create this experience where I felt unsafe or unsure of myself, and where I might have been able to set a boundary sooner and said, hey, whoa, actually, I'm going to need to leave right now. And in this way, like getting better at stopping that type of engagement sooner, right? Like setting that boundary. Like for me, it's like I feel like I get closer and closer to my authentic boundary with it, because like the first time I catch a boundary, for me, I would say I caught it because it just triggered me so badly, crossed my boundary so far, that then I'm like, okay, well, it's done, and where is my authentic boundary? And I realized, okay, well, it was probably 5 minutes in. But then I realized, well, no, actually 5 minutes wasn't even enough. I didn't want to be around this person for 1 minute. So then I had to shift what like this is a normal progression of our journey with all these things.
Right. So you're saying you get better at creating boundaries.
Right.
It takes practice.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say, like, overall, people, if you're around negative energy or you're having problems with boundaries with people, we would say that it's about boundaries, truly.
Yeah.
Like how to handle negative people, or people where you feel like you can't manage your energy well, where it dysregulates your nervous system or dysregulates your energy or even your focus, is to try some of these things by becoming aware. But ultimately, we would want you to feel empowered enough to say no. Like, you don't like it and you're allowed to not like it, period.
And again, I know we said this, but like that is like 20 steps in, really, right? Because initially
they already crossed your boundary.
They're affecting you because your trigger was there, but your trigger is there because your trigger's in your subconscious, or your trigger is in your emotional flashback within your vessel, within your being. So like we're kind of circling back around to 20 steps down, and the only way to see the 20 steps down is because we actually had this kind of, let's say, crappy experience that we didn't necessarily like, and that's great.
So what I feel like Brenda's saying, or what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you are triggered, you're already finding yourself in this experience. If you're finding yourself in the experience, your boundary, she's saying, has actually been crossed way, way ago. And it's just coming up now in this
opportunity
as this reflection of not being able to handle it, seeking help, being like, hey, what's going on? Because they've been crossing your boundaries, is what she's saying. And you might not have known that, and so she's saying if you could,
or you're crossing your own boundary, or you're, right? Yeah, exactly.
You must be crossing your own boundary because you're even asking, is it okay for me to create a boundary?
Right.
right? Like I feel like that is a reoccurring theme with people, is that they don't feel like they can even create boundaries. That's something we've had to work through. So becoming aware, saying no, creating safety for sure, using your imagination to create energetic spaces where you can feel safe.
Right.
And then, but just because you're putting a Band-Aid on it, and I feel like that's what you're saying too, Brenda, is like, you can put yourself away from the situation, right? You can say no and say, this person can no longer come into my energy, but please do the work to really uncover what their initial trigger was or where the wound is in the first place.
Because you can repair it to where the trigger no longer takes place, because you've done the internal work to resolve it, to heal fully. It is a gift to give you this opportunity to master the self.
Right. And to really recognize that, especially if it's a family member or something, they've probably been crossing your boundaries for a while.
Or it's a belief system or pattern within your culture, your family system of functioning that does not work for your authentic self.
Or even work culture,
right?
Where you're not allowed to say no and you just have to take it. And recognizing whether or not that even aligns with you, and speaking up. We always would want to empower you to speak up and create boundaries in a healthy way. And the gray rocking, you can look that up. That's a mental health technique. Working with especially more aggressive people.
Yeah. Or toxic.
Or toxic people, for sure. But utilizing and seeing it as the gift that it is, which is taking your power back from past wounds and to stop them from repeating into the future.
Because the purpose is truly to allow yourself to live your life purpose, to have your own authentic, vulnerable, powerful expression in this world. That's what it's all about. Nothing bad is happening. It is really a gift, and it definitely doesn't always feel like that. As someone who walks this walk, I do get that. And just honoring you wherever you are on this journey. And, thank you for being willing to have this really kind of hard conversation about all of this. And thank you so much for your questions. They do help us know where to go and what to talk about.
Yeah, so if you're out there and you're feeling, like your boundaries are being violated, we see you. Yeah. And it's not an always easy journey, but
your experience
you
matters.
matter.
Yes.
Yeah, so
thank you
sending
for being
you guys
here.
love.
Sending love.
Till next time.